Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. It looks like people are still joining, but we do have a lot of material to get through, so we're going to go ahead and get going. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the second webinar in the HUD's Manufactured Housing webinar series. So this webinar is going to discuss manufactured housing in the context of Notice CPD 2310, which was recently published. So as we said, welcome. I wanted to go through a couple of quick housekeeping tips. So everyone joining as attendees, you are muted with your cameras off. By the settings, you aren't able to unmute. So we do ask if you're having issues with troubleshooting, if you can't see or can't hear, or having another issue, please use the chat feature for all troubleshooting issues like that and address your message to host. So you'll see if you open up the chat on your right hand side, there's a toolbar and you should see chat, and if you open that, there's a drop down that allows you to address your message to either everyone or to the host or to all panelists. So do make sure that you address those troubleshooting messages to the host so that we can try to help you. We are asking if everyone can try to stick to the Q&A feature for all of your questions. That just can help us keep the questions organized. We do plan to have some time for Q&A, so we want to make sure that we can catch all of those questions. So if you don't see the Q&A, you can, if you go down to your lower right-hand corner, there's 3 dots, and if you hover on that, it says panel options. If you click on it, you should see an option for Q&A, and that will bring up the Q&A into your toolbar. And then you can type in a question. We do ask you to address all of your questions to all panelists in that dropdown. So just, we'll remind you a couple more times, but we're trying to keep the chat and the Q&A separate if possible. Just a note, so this webinar is being recorded. We will provide the video as well as the transcriptions and any Q&A follow-up materials. Those will be posted to the HUD Exchange after the webinar. So it does take a little time to prepare those materials, so they won't be available immediately after the webinar, but hopefully you do subscribe to the HUD Exchange. You will get a notification saying materials are posted, so they will be available. So we are your presenters. So I'm Catherine Mayrose, I'm a senior consultant with Capital Access. We're thrilled to be partnering with HUD to help out with this webinar series. And I have with me my colleague Stan Fitterman as well. Stan, I don't know if you want to say anything to introduce yourself. Say hi.
Hello. I'm Stan Fitterman, working with Capital Access on this.
Great, thank you. So our agenda for today, so we are going to start off with some opening remarks from the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Grant Programs with HUD. Then we're going to take a look at how the new notice fits into the broader context of federal efforts to increase housing supply across the nation. After that, we are going to then take a closer look at the new notice and some specific regulatory updates that it includes related to manufactured housing. Then we're really excited to have a couple of grantees who have done manufactured housing and are going to speak with us about their experiences and insights on doing manufactured housing activities. And then finally, we will have some time for your questions and answers. So again, please do address your questions into the Q&A section in your toolbar. We will probably not have time to get to everyone's questions and answers, but we do want to let you know that we are definitely, we're taking note of your questions, and so we do want to just let you know that even if we don't have time to get to it, but we will try to consider how additional guidance or information might be provided at a later date to still try to answer the most common questions. So to kick us off, without further ado, we have an introduction from Claudia Monterosa, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Grant Programs with HUD. So she is going to offer us some opening remarks to get us started.
Hello, everybody. So I'm so glad that you have joined us today to learn more about our recent CPD notice on CDBG housing activities. And I'm very excited to kick us off to do a deeper dive as to how our CPD housing notice further clarifies and expands the use of CDBG funding for manufactured housing uses. One of the top commitments from our Biden-Harris administration and Secretary Fudge is to directly address our national housing supply crisis and taking bold steps to make housing more affordable for all. As many of us know, homeownership has become unattainable for many households, and on top of that, rents continue to rise faster than income. We know the struggle to access safe, decent housing falls disproportionately on lower income households. The scale and the seriousness of this problem requires not one solution, but many. HUD is proud to be part of this work to deploy new tools and strategies to increase the housing supply and affordability resources that are critical to promoting equitable, sustainable, energy efficient, and resilient housing. From new DOT guidance on financing transit-oriented development to the expansion of GSA's Good Neighbor Program promoting residential redevelopment of federal surplus properties, to the recently updated HUD notice on using CBD funds in support of housing activities, the challenge to increase the affordable housing supply is being met on many, many fronts. And while we are all working on all these fronts to confront this crisis through these efforts, we rely on you, our state and local and tribal partners, in collaboration with your grassroots nonprofit and affordable housing developers, to develop innovative solutions to unique housing needs of your local communities. And we are here to support you in doing what you do best. And that brings us to our presentation today. Notice CPD 23-10 is a reissuance of a previous HUD guidance on eligible CDBG activities that support affordable housing. As I alluded before, this newly updated notice includes important policy updates that we hope will create flexibilities for you to be more to more feasibly undertake manufactured housing activities with your CDBG dollars. As we discussed in the previous webinar, manufactured housing is one of the largest sources of unsubsidized affordable housing in the United States, home to over 20 million people. Updates to the HUD code and technological advances in the industry have increased the safety and the resilience on manufactured homes and made them more energy efficient. Manufactured homes are also as durable as site-built, and with a sustainable, fair ownership model, they can build equity and promote generational wealth, which is so important to all of us here. In this webinar, we will walk through the new updates that provide expanded eligibility for the development of manufactured housing. But I also want to encourage you to read our new notice for guidance on how other CDBG eligible housing activities, and to visit our HUD exchange for activity design ideas, best practices, and examples of housing activities and what other grantees have successfully undertaken. I really do encourage you to do that and to really read deeply into the notice, because we are expanding the use of CDBG eligible activities under this revised notice. So we are very happy to have with us today a panel of grantees who have agreed to share their experience with manufactured housing activities and their thoughts about how the flexibilities in the new notice could help them. We are also very grateful for their participation and insights that they will be providing this afternoon. And so I will leave you to a really wonderful program today. I do need to know that there are going to be an additional 2 webinars in this series, and then I will now turn it over to our host to continue our program. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. So let's dive in. First section, we're going to talk about how Notice CPD 23-10 supports federal housing supply efforts. So what is the purpose of Notice CPD 2310? As Deputy Assistant Secretary Monterosa said, this is a reissuance of a notice that has been previously published, but the timing of this notice is really important because, as I'm sure all of us know and has been discussed, we do have a critical shortage of affordable housing in many communities. The federal efforts through the Biden-Harris administration and the efforts of HUD under Secretary Fudge have been trying to address this housing supply. So this notice is a part of a much larger strategy to try to address this housing supply, not only through the Biden-Harris administration's Housing Supply Action Plan, but also through HUD's 2022 through 26 strategic plan goals and objectives. So this notice will generally highlight ways that you can use CDBG funds in support of affordable housing activities, specifically in areas like resilience planning, rehabilitation, relocation, tornado-safe homes, and public facilities. Another reason for this notice is to try to help grantees, figure out what the compliance pathway might be if they're trying to use CDBG funding to fund the activities that work best for their local communities in order to address your own housing needs in your community, while making sure that you're compliant with the applicable regulations and national objective requirements. And then lastly, and the reason that we're all here today, is that this notice does provide a regulatory update that enhances the flexibility to use CDBG funds for manufactured housing that better align with the home program. So we are going to take a closer look at that. So first, the Biden-Harris administration, they have published a housing supply action plan. It does include several efforts that are specifically intended to support the production and preservation of manufactured housing. So among those efforts, they are going to deploy new financing mechanisms to build and preserve housing if there are existing financing gaps, including with manufactured housing. Another effort is to assess the feasibility of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to support the purchase of personal property manufactured housing loans. And also, they're going to look at revising the Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae purchase targets to hopefully free up financing in the market for the purchase or refinance of manufactured homes. In addition, they are going to take steps to hopefully make it easier to finance new units and help the manufacturers of manufactured housing update their designs to meet consumer demands that are changing and updating with consumer needs. Some of those specific efforts would include increasing the usability of FHA's Title I loan program for manufactured housing, supporting greater securitization of Title I loans through the Ginnie Mae platform, which is the government national mortgage association who guarantees mortgage-backed securities, and also updating the HUD code, which is the HUD Manufactured Home Construction and Safety Standards, to allow manufacturers to modernize and expand their production lines, and also help manufacturers respond to supply chain issues. So I will say, of those first two bullet points with the Title I program, our webinar next week is going to specifically focus on financing and funding sources for manufactured housing. So more information will be provided about some of those sources next week. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that. So in addition to the Biden-Harris administration's Housing Supply Action Plan, HUD has also provided for supporting and promoting manufactured housing in its FY 2022 through 26 strategic plan goals. So among those efforts, strategic goal 1 is to support underserved communities. That does include vulnerable populations residing in manufactured homes. They also want to promote equitable community development by making sure that residents of manufactured housing are incorporated into overall community planning processes with state and local government efforts. Another goal is to ensure access to and increase the production of affordable housing. So that's going to be, taking efforts to support affordable housing production, promoting homeownership opportunities to make sure that manufactured homes are seen as an available, affordable, sustainable investment for people. The third goal is to promote homeownership, so advancing homeownership by encouraging the manufactured home and site acquisition. So here we're getting into some of the regulatory updates in the new notice to hopefully provide additional sustainability and stability to tenants and other residents of manufactured homes. And then finally, to advance sustainable homeownership, by which we're talking about making manufactured homes and manufactured housing communities more resilient and resistant to climate hazards and other types of hazards. So I'm going to turn it over to Stan, and he's going to walk us through some of the specific aspects of the new notice that focus on manufactured housing.
All right, thank you so much, Catherine. So, all right, so let's talk about CDBG and new construction. Are you still advancing, Catherine?
Yep, sorry.
All right. So just a reminder, the construction of new housing is generally ineligible under CDB regs, except housing constructed by a community-based development organization, CBDO, that's the requirements of that are outlined in the citations we have here and the rule for entitlement and for states. Housing of last resort, as provided under this 570.207, which relates to Uniform Relocation Act. And if permitted by specific waiver and a federal notice, like DR, we get those a lot in CDBG DR. If you're planning to do new construction under any of these bullets, we'd like to encourage you to consult with your CPD rep before doing so and before committing the funds so that you'll make sure that you're doing everything correctly. Okay, so here's the exciting news we have, which is that under CPD 2310, it allows for the purchase of manufactured housing units that are part of the community's permanent housing stock as an eligible CDBG activity, as opposed to it being an ineligible new construction. So under this notice, we now have the ability to buy newly constructed manufactured housing units and use CDBG funds for the acquisition. Okay, so couple of things, limitations. One, it's for manufactured housing. So this is all types of non-motorized manufactured housing units that meet the definition of basically the HUD code, right? The 24 CFR 3280.2, that is things that are built to the HUD standards, the HUD construction standards for manufactured housing. Now this only applies, we can only use CDBG funds for the acquisition. We have to use another source for the installation, or as the industry likes to call it, setup. So we do have that kind of a limitation on us. I also want to make sure that it's clear that RV is exempted from coverage under federal program regs. This update does not apply to those. And modular homes, which are homes, factory-built homes that are built to state and local codes, also not part of this update to this notice, included in this notice. Okay. Other considerations. So this activity can be undertaken by a grantee or a subrecipient. We need to document the acquisitions for a public purpose because that's in the regs and that's in the notice. It can be ownership, it can be rental, or it can be mixed tenure, which is where the owner owns the manufactured housing unit but rents the pad, rents the land. Now, remember, if we're doing this for rental housing, the regs also require us to identify what our affordable rents are before we do this work. Okay, so what manufactured housing activities are CDBG eligible? Acquisition of manufactured housing as either acquisition of real property, or we can assist homeowners in buying a manufactured home. We can buy the land for the home site for the house that's going to be where the manufactured housing is going to be set. We can rehab, or we can replace an existing substandard manufactured home. We can make improvements to on-site infrastructure, utilities, and a manufactured housing community. That's big. We can also make improvements to the sites through eligible activities such as clearance, demolition, remediation of suspected contaminants, kerosene, gasoline, anything else that's we don't want there. Okay, so if y'all were able to join us, those of you that were able to join us last week, you may recall that units in manufactured housing communities are typically on leased pads, and the homeowner owns the unit, but someone else typically owns the land. And as we mentioned last week, this can lead to some unstable housing situations if the owner of the community decides they want to sell, or there's really nothing prohibiting them other than market forces from consistently raising rent. So rents could get to a point where they are unaffordable for certain tenants. So as a result of that, we're encouraging folks who are going to work with getting new homes into manufactured housing communities to require a deed restriction or perhaps a long-term lease on the land to help ensure that the stability for the homeowner. We're also encouraging people to look into resident-owned communities. We talked about that last week as well, where the tenants, where the people who live there, who own the homes there, collectively own the sites. And this increases housing security. It can help preserve affordability. We have prevent eviction. Probably we should say limit, reduce eviction, because what we're trying to do is prevent eviction from someone selling the property for another use. And in those cases, as we mentioned last week, the owners of the homes are told that they have to move. They've given notice, and sometimes the homes they own there are not able to be moved. It's also expensive to move them. All right. Okay, we also can do direct home ownership assistance. It can be acquired either existing or it can be something that's newly constructed. Our eligible expenses, in addition to the acquisition, include land and site prep, including clearance and installation of utilities. Again, we could not help pay for the install of the manufactured unit, but if we're doing homeownership assistance, there's more than likely going to be another loan. So that would be another source of funding coming in. That would be something that would be used for the setup. Okay, all right. So this one I'm excited about. This is one of my favorite changes, and that is we can now fund a facility that's going to produce manufactured housing as a special economic development activity under two conditions. The factory or the facility needs to make housing units that'll be affordable to LMI persons predominantly. It needs most of their production is for that. And the units are intended to become part of the community's permanent housing stock. Eligible costs include acquisition, construction, reconstruction of the facility, rehab of the facility, installation of commercial or industrial building structures, and other real property equipment and improvements for this facility that's going to produce manufactured housing. Okay, all right, and I think this is the last thing I'm going to talk about before we have some grantees to talk. And this is tornado safe shelters. Now, under 105A of the Housing and Community Development Act, CDBG funds can be used to construct or improve a tornado shelter for the residents of a manufactured housing, with some caveats we'll talk about in a second. It can provide loans or grants to nonprofit and for-profits, including owners of manufactured housing communities, to construct or improve tornado-safe shelters in neighborhoods that have at least 20 manufactured homes. And the shelter is going to be made available to those residents. And under this, we've got additional requirements that we couldn't fit on this slide, so we're going to show them on the next slide. All right, so neighborhoods or manufactured housing communities receiving assistance must meet all the following. Consists predominantly of low and moderate income persons. We're used to that requirement, but may be difficult if you're one of the upper quartile people with your grant. Be in a state in which a tornado has occurred within the past 3 fiscal years. Have a warning system, and if it's in a manufactured housing community, it needs to be within 1,500 feet of the community. We want to ensure that the shelter that we're building is enough to house the people, accommodate all the people that live in the manufactured housing units. And no surprise, it needs to comply with standards for construction that FEMA has identified. in order to make it safe during a tornado. And there might be one more. Yes, okay. And the alternative eligible activities involving tornado-safe shelters, we can be used to assist tornado shelters as a public facility, provided it's on publicly owned land or in a facility owned by a subrecipient that's open to the public during normal business hours. We can use CDBG funds to incorporate tornado shelters as part of a rehab. You've got the citations for you here. And this is the type of activity that would likely be, we would be able to do for grantees that they're in that upper quartile percentage for LMI area benefit activities.
Thanks,
Okay,
Dan.
all right. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for advancing the slides.
So now we're going to talk to a couple of grantees who have actually done manufactured housing activities or are currently doing manufactured housing activities. To get their perspective, we'd like to know kind of what they did and why, and just what their thoughts are on the new notice and how it might help. So I'm really pleased to introduce our grantees. So we have with us Iman Batiste. She is the Assistant Director of Community Development with the Department of Community Development in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana, which is in the greater New Orleans area. And we have Molly Kaler, the Director of Housing and Community Development with the New Hampshire Community Development Finance Authority. So welcome, Iman and Molly. Thank you so much for being with us today. So we'll start with Iman, and we wanted to just ask a couple of questions and find out more about what Jefferson Parish did and what your experience was. So I guess to start out, can you tell us a little bit about the activities that Jefferson Parish undertook?
Sure, Caitlin. So what we did is we basically did a new construction. We had some homes that had been demolished during a hurricane, which we tend to have a lot here in Louisiana. We're prone to those things, that and flooding. So we have a small little town called Jean Lafitte, and another small town called Grand Isle. And there are our lower lying coastal areas, and they tend to have a lot of, family orientated people that are fishermen. And so, of course, they're low MI, so they needed some help. We went down and we did new construction, and we set up some new modular manufactured homes. All of those homes that we did, I believe we did at least 10 to 12. They were all put up on pylons um, throughout the town, because we needed to make sure when we put them on the pylons that they were above the recommended flood. The flood line, to make sure that these people weren't impacted by flooding again, which is what had happened prior. The homes moved a lot quicker by utilizing the manufactured homes, rather than going through stick builds. Those things take a little bit more time because of all the design that needs to go into it. We were able to find a partner that we could purchase these manufactured homes from, and we were able to look at it and then bring in those residents that we were going to be helping to allow them to see the different models. And so they were actually able to participate in it as far as choosing what was going to work best for them. We had a couple of disabled clients that not only did we were able to provide them with this manufactured home, we were even able to put elevators on their homes so that they could get in and out of them because we had placed the homes up so high. So this was a great partnership that we did with the town of Jean Lafitte, and we were able to bring some people some ease and to be able to feel like they could go home again, which was the greatest part of doing all of this.
Absolutely. That's so important. So I'm just curious, for the purchase of the homes, was that funded with like a CDBG DR allocation, or did you have a partner who used their own funds for the purchase of the homes, or how was that funded?
So when we partnered with the town of Jean Lafitte, it wasn't a CDBGR. But they did utilize funds that they had received to do the demolition portion of it. What we did for buying, we used home funding for that side. And so it was a collaboration of different funding to go into that. Because of course the regs that were there during that time. So we tried to, stay on par as much as we possibly could. So the new updates with CDBG funding, seeing what we could do now as far as manufactured homes, this is amazing. This is going to help us to be able to do more. I especially love the part about rehabbing, because we have so many people that are already in manufactured homes that need help to fix, the homes that they're already in. So this is amazing, and this is something that we will move toward doing, utilizing the CDBG funding to help homeowners that are already in manufactured homes to do rehab on them.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I'm just curious, but can you speak a little bit about just the decision to do manufactured housing as opposed to stick build? So I think you had mentioned that part of it was that it is quicker. They are quicker to construct and get people back in homes. Were there other factors that you considered? Was it, the result of a citizen participation that requested it, or was it just research and, seeing the benefits of manufactured housing, or kind of what was the thought process?
So it was actually a lot of what you said. We were considering the timeliness to move
Mhm.
these homeowners back into a home and how long it was going to take. It was also the financial side of it. It was cheaper for us to go this route, and that way we were able to help more people, um, rather than just going stick built, because that would have cost the project. It would have been a lot more expensive for us. Um, and also the fact that in that area, that we helped a lot of people already had homes that were manufactured. So it's something that was already a part of that community,
Mhm.
um, because it's not a very large community, and a lot of the it's kind of landlocked, okay, and so there's not a lot of space to do things that are too big in that area. Again, as I mentioned, it's a little fisherman town, so um, you've got to think about all of those things, and this appeared to be the best thing for everyone. And the fact that they were able to participate in choosing which model worked best for them.
Yeah, and I think when we spoke earlier, you had mentioned that the units are really beautiful. So hopefully the homeowners were really happy with their new home.
Caitlin, I actually do speak to a lot of the homeowners from time to time. They will call me, and they are very happy. As a matter of fact, I had a couple of calls after the last hurricane that we had, and they called to let me know that their homes were still standing.
Oh, that's amazing. That's great.
that that was amazing, and that made me feel good that we were able to provide them with something that stood the test of time. So
Absolutely.
that's a good thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool. That's really great to hear. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences. It seems like it was really, rewarding for the homeowners and a good investment for the community. So it's great to hear.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Thanks, Iman. So we're going to move along to Molly now. So Molly Kaler with the state of New Hampshire, as I said, the Director of Housing and Community Development. So Molly, welcome, and thanks for joining us. And so can we, tell us a little bit about your activities and what the state is doing with manufactured housing?
Yes, I'm glad to be here today and share a little bit about what's going on in New Hampshire. So in New Hampshire, we have a large number of manufactured housing parks. They range in size from a couple homes to several dozen homes. A lot of these parks are aging. They're several decades old at this point, and their infrastructure is starting to see a lot of wear and tear and cause a lot of not only uh, financial burden for the communities, but also sometimes health and safety challenges as well. And another kind of neat thing about New Hampshire is a lot of these communities over the last couple decades have been becoming resident-owned communities. The Rock USA organization was actually born in New Hampshire, and so the work started out here and has spread across the United States. But we have a large number of manufactured housing parks that are now resident-owned communities, and those by and large are the communities that we typically assist. And the way we assist them is through water and sewer infrastructure support. And so, as I said, most of them are their infrastructure is approaching the end of its lifespan, and a lot of them, while some of them are connected to municipal water and sewer, again because we're a really rural state, a lot of them are multiple wells and multiple septic systems that support a large number of homes. And so our CDBG funds have been used, sometimes only CDBG funds, and sometimes in conjunction with other funding, depending on how large the project is, to upgrade those systems to make them safe and more cost effective for the communities.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like it's really meeting a need that's a lot of places have aging infrastructure, but especially if you're trying to promote the stability of the resident-owned communities, giving them that support is really critical. Can you speak a little bit about just what was your decision to your organization's decision to put funds into manufactured housing and supporting this, as opposed to perhaps any of the other things that you could have done with your funds?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's because we recognize that manufactured housing is one of the largest sources of naturally occurring affordable housing in our state. We actually don't have a lot of multi-unit housing in our various communities due to a lot of zoning ordinances and things like that. But we do have a lot of manufactured housing cooperatives that were grandfathered in, and we recognized that a lot of folks were naturally living in these communities, and we partnered with the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. They're one of our partners who started the resident-owned community organization, and through our work with them, we recognized this huge infrastructure need that these communities have. In fact, it's something interesting. When our state received ARPA funds, another state agency, the Department of Environmental Services, actually created a separate set aside for funding for water and sewer infrastructure improvements for manufactured housing cooperatives, because there was such a need. We're doing our best with our funding to try to meet that need, but there's just such a huge need because, again, many of these parks are aging. So it's, we are working with partners, and in fact, other partners now are seeing a need for increased funding to help support these communities and to continue to ensure that we have a good number of affordable units available.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It seems like a really great example where you have a lot of just really engaged high capacity partners, and that can be super helpful, I know, with really implementing any of your activities, but especially housing, because it's so critical. So that's great. And I do want to take a quick opportunity to just plug for everyone that the webinar next week is going to talk about braiding together different funding sources and financing. So as Molly pointed out, you know, that is something that it sounds like the state of New Hampshire has done quite a bit, and we're going to be looking at that subject in detail next week. So hopefully everyone will be able to join us for that. But Molly, I wanted to also ask you, just so in consideration of the new notice and the new flexibility with being able to use CDBG funds for acquisition of units, as well as potentially the economic development aspect of using funds for production facilities. Do you have any thoughts about just how that might, you know, change the direction of your activities or enhance your activities in the future, or just free you up to be able to do different things? Kind of what might that look like for New Hampshire?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I do see that it's I think it's going to be able to enhance the number of different activities that we can do in these communities. So as I said, right now we're really focused on water and sewer infrastructure, but we are certainly seeing a need. Again, not only is the infrastructure aging, but some of the actual homes themselves are aging and kind of past the point of repair. They may need to be demolished and replaced, and you know there could be a opportunity there for us to step in and assist in that way. Another thing that we've seen is some of these communities you know have vacant pad space but haven't been able to add new homes on them because their water and sewer infrastructure isn't able to support an increased load. So if that, you know, the houses maybe 10 years ago went away, they haven't been able to put a new home there, but now that once the water and sewer deficits are addressed, they, you know, are looking to kind of fill their park, and so that might be another need for just vacant spaces and adding new homes that way, or again to demolish and to bring in new homes for in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly seems like it's kind of a many-pronged approach, and now you can potentially add another prong with the CDBG funds. So yeah, that's really exciting. So thank you very much to both Iman and Molly for coming on today and sharing their experiences with us. This was super helpful. It's just really, you know, really interesting to see what people are actually doing on the ground and how it works. So we really appreciate both of you for coming on. Iman, if you are still have an extra minute, we did have a question that I wanted to follow up on really quick. As far as the project with Jefferson Parish, did you say that was scattered sites, and were those home ownership, or were those part of a manufactured housing community that was leased? Or can you just clarify how the tenure worked there?
Yeah, sure, Caitlin. So they were scatter sites. It was actual homeowners that owned their manufactured homes, and they owned their land.
Okay, so that sounds like the fee simple model, I think
Yeah.
is how we would phrase that. Okay. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. So everyone, that concludes our portion of grantee insights. So we're going to keep moving ahead. And again, a huge thank you to Molly and Iman for sharing with us today. So now we're going to go ahead and move into Q&A. So I have been keeping half an eye on the questions coming into the chat. It looks like several folks have a lot of really great questions. I do want to just emphasize that any questions that involve the layering of different funding sources or the navigating of the various regulatory requirements with different funding sources, those will be the topic, as I said, of next week's webinar. So we're probably going to hold off on those types of questions for the most part because we do anticipate being able to cover those next week. So I'm going to go ahead and check in with Grant. So Grant, what's our first question?
Hi, folks. Real quick, first one at the top is when does the Federal Register notice take effect? It might be in there, but can you remind folks?
Yeah, so Stan, were you going to say something?
Well, I believe it's in effect now, right? It's issued October 26, 2023.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the date.
Another question that we may not have an immediate answer to, but how might this new guidance impact the environmental review process? I know that's kind of an open-ended question, but do we have any quick insights on that, or is that to be coming?
I haven't seen anything specifically come out about that. I would think in terms of just the eligibility, I mean, the environmental review process will still be the same process that you always do under Part 58.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't have any significant, significant changes for environmental reviews.
Correct, thank you. And another one would be if there's some questions about how manufactured housing is considered permanent housing stock and how that might then have some impact on future con plans and action planning work. So I think it's a two-part question.
Well, the permanent stock would be that it is taxed as real estate and not as personal property. And those are things that vary from state to state and sometimes from community to community.
And I think there will be some guidance forthcoming a little bit further on that in terms of qualifying manufactured housing as primary resident permanent housing.
Right.
Well, and presumably it does need to be, I mean, this notice is primarily concerned with manufactured housing as we mean it intentionally with that term to be housing that was constructed in accordance with the HUD code after 1976. So it would primarily apply to that. And so I think by definition, it's excluding your RV parks or any kind of community of temporary units that are, everyone knows that they're temporary. They're not intended for people to live in that space permanently in that unit.
Right, and there can be local variety depending on other factors.
Right.
Just a clarification question about when we're talking about acquisition of manufactured housing, are we only meaning acquisition from a manufactured housing producer, so new manufactured housing units, or can that also include manufactured housing that exists and meets current code requirements?
I don't believe that the notice speaks specifically to that, but it can include a unit that's not being purchased directly from the manufacturer, as long as that unit meets the HUD code. So that isn't something that HUD is necessarily putting limitations on either way. They're just concerned that it is a manufactured housing unit as defined as a unit that was constructed in accordance with the HUD code.
And it does include existing units, not just new.
Right. I'll also just point out really quick, so to anyone who wasn't able to join us last week, so a lot of the questions about this terminology that we're referencing right now, questions about, the difference between manufactured housing versus modular, those are things that were covered in the first webinar, as well as some other information about ownership and governance models and outdated perceptions about manufactured housing. So those materials should be available any day on the HUD Exchange. They have been submitted. So, so a lot of your answers about those questions will be found in that first webinar.
Thank you.
I've been told they are available on the HUD Exchange. So
another one is there were some questions about use of home funds and some other program funds that I think that's not really for this moment, but I think we can try and address as a follow-up. There was a question, it's an interesting one. There was discussion about being able to include things like safe shelters. And there was a question about, is that strictly for what was intended, say, with tornado resiliency, or are we talking about community shelters or other types of shelters, such as helping people get out of high heat areas and things like that?
And the amendment to the act specifically states tornadoes and shelter. So, and it has the rules in there about having had a requirements of having been in an area that's had a tornado within the last 3 fiscal years. So it's a very specific part of the Housing and Community Development Act.
Thank you. There's a few more technical questions about specific matrix codes that could be used for acquisition and some other operational technical questions about transactional steps to be used that I think probably should be held over for a later response. But that, I think, covers the majority of the nature of questions that we're getting at the moment.
Sure. I did want to note a couple of things. So just that the home program has its own notice in relation to manufactured housing. So that will be where you will find guidance on comparable home requirements for manufactured housing. Also, just going back to the question about the shelters, so this requirement is specifically referring to tornado shelters, as Stan mentioned. However, for that use, depending on the ownership of the land under the shelter, it might be able to be done as a public facility. So, for example, a community center that doubles as a shelter would be, potentially an eligible activity as a public facility. So, just wanted to follow up and clarify that.
And there was another one about ownership versus rental and whether this is only applicable to primary residency ownership or if manufactured housing can be a solution for affordable rental. And the answer is both.
Yeah, both. And also in a manufactured housing community where the homeowner owns the house but rents the land.
Right. So it's so for CDBG, HUD is okay with either one.
All three.
Sorry, all three. Um,
And I haven't seen any new ones rolling in, so I think that means that the notice was pretty direct.
right.
There are a few questions that will be covered in some of the subsequent topics and presentations, so I don't think we have to call those all out individually. You've messaged on that, Catherine. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize again, just so the acquisition, this flexibility, it does say that it is intended for units that are going to be part of a community's permanent housing stock. I'm not aware, so I've just saw a couple of questions come through about that, and I just wanted to clarify again. So I'm not aware that that's been, officially defined and some official parameters have been set around that term. But what it is intended to exclude is your RV parks or, any kind of communities of more temporary type units that are not intended for people to be residing in that unit on that site for the long term. So it's not talking about leasing versus ownership. It's just talking more about the type of unit, and whether it's intended to be permanent. So we do, although we do want to note that that can vary depending on state and local ordinances. So I think as Stan pointed out earlier, there is also a distinction between if it's, considered personal property or not. So it does also depend on your local code, but for the purposes of this notice and that specific wording, just to clarify, it's not talking about lease versus ownership.
And just to add to that, there were some questions that were in the form of asking about modular, and I'll just point out that the previously shared out in first webinar clarified some of the terms of use, and that we're talking about manufactured housing, not modular, which is another definition in terms of an approach and method to construction. So
Right, modular are built to state and local codes. Manufactured housing is built to the HUD code.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, so I think that wraps up pretty much all of the, the more broad questions that we have today. Again, I do want to reiterate that, we know there were a lot of questions from last time, and we know that there's a lot of questions around this issue. We are sensitive to that. So, HUD is aware that this is something that people have questions about, and they are working to, try to communicate to answer people's questions, going forward as much as possible. So we do appreciate your questions, even if we haven't been able to get to them last week or this week, because those are helping to shape potential future communications or information that might be published. So we do appreciate everyone joining us today. I want to just call out really quick. So again, last week was our introduction to manufactured housing webinar. So we really started at the bottom with what is manufactured housing and what types of ownership and governance models, some of those considerations, really addressing how manufactured housing is high quality, it is resilient, it depending on the ownership model, it can build equity. So we just tried to start at the foundational level. So I strongly recommend going back and checking out that webinar if you haven't already. I can clarify that it is available on the HUD Exchange. And then please do register if you haven't already registered for the upcoming webinars in the series. I think only the third one is currently open for registration, and that's using federal funding sources to develop manufactured housing. So we will be taking a look at those different requirements, those different funding sources that are potentially available, and what it looks like to actually, layer those for a manufactured housing project. And then our fourth webinar in the series is going to be manufactured housing and tribal communities. So focusing on guidance and information that will help tribal communities develop manufactured housing to meet their housing needs as well. The date for that one hasn't been officially confirmed yet, but it will be communicated as soon as confirmed, and we hope to see everyone for these upcoming webinars. So thank you very much for your attention today and for your excellent questions. We wish you the best of luck with your activities, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. And thank you so much.